Hey folks, welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania once again. A lot of talk about the ICJ, the ICC, a lot of confusion about what they are and what their jurisdiction is. Well, for starters, let's just talk about the ICJ. The International Court of Justice is a UN body that was created to settle disputes between states. So 3 of these disputes come to mind, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning this before we get on to the South Africa case. So the first is Botswana and Namibia, who took each other to court over Sududu Island in the Chobe River. It's a little sandbar island between the 2 countries. The court awarded the island to Botswana, and both parties recognized that, for the most part, historically, although there was an incident a couple years ago there. But the island now belongs to Botswana. Another case before the court was the Bokassa Peninsula that was part of Nigeria, Anglophone, but Cameroon is Francophone, but based on historical precedent, the court awarded it to Cameroon, and Nigeria and Cameroon have recognized that. Maybe not the people living in the peninsula, but you get my point. The states recognized the result. A third case was the Chinese communists were told that they don't control the 9-dash line. It's fiction, and that communist China must withdraw from there, but they've simply ignored that court decision and went about and done what they wanted. So that's the International Court of Justice when 2 states have a dispute. What South Africa has done in the International Court of Justice is they've perverted the system. Now, there was a groundbreaking genocide case that took place in 2018 when the Gambia challenged Myanmar for a purported genocide against the Rohingya Muslim minority inside of Myanmar. Well, Gambia has no stake in the game. They're not an aggrieved party, but they took the case to the court. It was unique. So from that standpoint, South Africa could take Israel to the court, but I don't even think that was legitimate. Nonetheless, it did happen for the Gambia. So South Africa is taking Israel to the court over this purported genocide. There's a problem with it. It doesn't come remotely close to the definition, legal definition, the international recognized definition of a genocide. So it's complete farce what South Africa has done. It's created all kinds of ill will around the world, except between parties that have no power politically, and somehow South Africa thinks that's a good thing. So what's next? Well, there's the International Criminal Court, which is based on the Rome Statute, largely written by American lawyers. It's a response to the events in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the early 1990s, and then in Rwanda with the genocide there, with 850,000 people butchered to death, mostly with pangas, machetes. Horrible situation. So the international community, at a sense of guilt, wanted to do something. U.S. lawyers working for the Clinton administration drafted what became known as the Rome Statute, and people began to sign it in 1999 and ratify it. But the Rome Statute is voluntary. There is no world justice. There's no world control. You must be a participant in the International Criminal Court in order for the ICC to take a case. Therefore, the warrant against Vladimir Putin is illegitimate by the ICC. They have no jurisdiction over him. The crimes he's supposedly committed happened either in Russia or in Ukraine, neither of which is a signatory to the ICC. It doesn't have jurisdiction there. It also doesn't have jurisdiction in Israel or in the United States. So the whole thing is a farce. But Joel Pollak posted that Israel should take South Africa to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, in a state-to-state dispute over human rights abuses in South Africa, specifically after the Constitutional Court, or the Con Court, this week refused to give a leave to appeal. In other words, they wouldn't review a case and consider the constitutionality of it, saying that on its merits it probably would succeed. Well, I think that's ludicrous, to say the least. We have clear-cut, prima facie evidence that people have been inspired by or referred to the song Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer when they murdered people and tortured people in farmhouses and scrawled that in blood on the wall. It's not a coincidence. They didn't just dream that up on the spot. It is a direct reflection of that song. So the Constitutional Court has failed in its prima facie duty to protect South Africans, and it's open season on minorities is what they've allowed here. But at the same time, people use profane words and they go to prison as convicted felons, Vicky Momberg being a case, or they're hounded to death, Penny Sparrow for her bad form for what she said. But in the normal society, we simply ignore people like that, or we ostracize them and don't associate with them. But not in South Africa, where they criminalize speech. Unless the speech is directed against ethnic minorities, white people in particular, then it's okay. But not just whites, also coloreds. We've yet to hear resolution in the Nobs Mkhize case, where she verbally assaulted colored flight attendants on the Fly South Air flight at the end of 2024. Nothing happening there. She's not being bankrupted. Now, I understand she was fired by South African Broadcasting Corporation, but that's the minimum she should have gotten. because she was violent on the plane and endangered the safety of all the passengers, and yet she walks free. We have Nota Boloye calling for the slaughter of whites and then saying, well, he wouldn't do it, but he wouldn't stop it, saying that that's what has to happen, also saying white people are genetically inferior, that they're based off of Neanderthals, that white women are genetically inferior, can't breed properly. It's shocking the level of dehumanization of white South Africans taking place. And not just whites, but Indians and colors are also victims of this stupidity. And as a consequence, all South Africans are victims of it. Nobody is enriched by this bigotry and racism that's allowed to run rampant by the courts, capture courts in South Africa. It's really unfortunate to see this sort of thing because the human dignity of everyone is undermined. South Africa has a constitution that's incredibly liberal, but the Constitutional Court is not living up to its responsibilities. Meanwhile, Joel Pollak has said, hey, Israel should take South Africa to the court, the ICJ, for its human rights abuses or its failure to protect the human rights of its own citizens. Well, that might be a stretch, except that maybe Israel has a link because South Africa has a Jewish population and they have responsibility as the homeland of Jews. I don't know, it's a stretch, but maybe. But then again, it's also a stretch for South Africa, which has no business in Gaza or in Judea, to file a case against Israel when how is South Africa aggrieved by this? It has been done before. Precedent was done by Gambia over Myanmar. But anyway, so what happens here? The ICJ and the ICC have no bearing whatsoever in what's happening in South Africa currently or what's happening in Gaza. And this is complete balderdash. This is simply window dressing. This is simply attention seeking on the part of everybody here. What needs to happen is the South African government needs to start enforcing the law. And I'm against laws that restrict speech. But when you call people to violence and you incite people to violence, that's not free speech. And speech has consequences. Well, it did for Vicky Momberg, who was in shock and wound up as a convicted felon in prison for the words she said. The words she said. She didn't assault anybody. She didn't hurt anybody. The words she said. Yet Nota Boloye, Julius Malema, can say far worse things and incite people to horrific violence and potentially to kill people, and nothing happens to them. In fact, it's protected speech. Well, maybe Joel Pollak has a point. I don't know. But somebody needs to get their act together in South Africa. South Africa is a land for all South Africans, not just for one select group. And the distorted history that people are telling in South Africa is mind-numbingly stupid. The history of South Africa has been perverted and completely obliterated in the past 3 decades. South Africans don't even know their own history. They don't even know where they come from or who they are. And as a consequence, people run around with low information views, poorly informed, spouting nonsense about things. So for instance, earlier today I saw on Twitter, some idiot posted something that, well, okay, they can take them to court, but as soon as we are able to take the thieves who stole the land during the Group Areas Act. Well, we can talk about the Group Areas Act, but let's talk about specifically what you're talking about. There's been restitution. 75,000 land claims were filed between 1995 and 1999, the legitimate window to make those claims. And it didn't have to be on behalf of yourself. It could have been your parents or your grandparents. Anyone since 1911, when the Union South Africa Act went into effect, essentially, you could say if one of your ancestors was cheated out of the land or family members, you could apply for restitution of the land or take a cash settlement. Most took cash settlements, some took the land settlements. It's difficult in urban areas. But 74,000 of the 75,000 claims were solved over 20 years ago. So these people running around with the land was stolen are just lying and distorting history. You want to talk about what happened in the 6 Xhosa Trekboer Wars or the 4 Basotho Trekboer Wars or the Anglo-Boer Wars? These are things lost to the sands of time. You want to talk about who owned it first? Well, then all of the Bantu-speaking peoples need to get the hell out of South Africa, along with the European descendants, because none of you were there. The Khoi and San were there. So if you want to play this stupid game about who came first, the chicken or the egg, we can play it all day long. And the winner of this are the Khoi and San, and then the colors by extension because they derive from Khoi and San. So there you go, at least in part. Nonsense. Nonsense. There was a solid, firm decision taken at the CODESA Convention, the Convention for Democratic South Africa in the early 1990s, to move into a peaceful settlement. And it said land claims could be filed back to the beginning of what became South Africa. Prior to 1911, no such country existed in the history books. Never existed. It was amalgamated into a country in 1911. And then we had the Group Areas Act. Then later on, we had apartheid came in 1948. Legitimate claims, most of which have been settled. The rest of this is just nonsense. And people need to stop it, or this country, South Africa, is going to collapse, and collapse very soon under the threats that are taking place in land invasions and theft right now. What say you, South Africa? What say you, world?